Personally, my background is I'm a thoroughbred Pakistani and basically an engineer by profession, but drifted into Afghan war during the Soviet era when the Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan. I joined the Afghan resistance as a volunteer and participated for 6 years fighting against the Soviets until the time we pushed them out of across the Oxus, and we captured Kabul. That was my last interaction with the Afghan resistance. When the civil war started, when the Masood and Hekmatyar started to fight among each other and the Taliban began to rise and captured Kabul later on, those were the periods when I withdrew and came back to Pakistan, and after various stints of small jobs and trying to understand the market, understanding the business of security management in Pakistan, in 2001 formed my own security consultation think tank, Brass Tacks. That's what you see today. Perhaps I was born to be a defense analyst and a visionary and an ideologue, because my upbringing was heavily influenced by the ideologies of Dr. Allama Iqbal and the modern revolutionaries of the time. And the fact that I physically, as a youngster, I was 22 years of age when I entered into Afghanistan, there were certain driving forces within, certain ideological and emotional forces which wanted to see Pakistan and Muslim world regaining its lost glory. And naturally, the Afghan experience shaped and molded my thought process tremendously. 6 years of battlefield experience fighting against the Soviets, and then that gave you the opportunity to understand the global geopolitics also, the national politics, the national security scenario, the interference and involvement of foreign secret services in trying to shape Pakistan's security, politics and destiny. So we were naturally directly confronted with these factors. As a youngster, they shaped my profile heavily. And when I came out of Afghanistan experience in 92 almost, when I was a youngster, 28 years of age. You see, we are working on very dangerous topics here, working against Israel, working against global Zionism, working against the neocon policy of reshaping the greater Middle East, and the American invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan and their attempts to encircle Muslim nuclear powers, and Muslim Pakistan, the nuclear power, and the potential nuclear power of Iran. It is very natural that when we speak against every tyrant of the world, when we speak against every secret service which is operating in this region, whether they are Indians or Israelis or the CIA, we would be threatened. And but to be honest, the biggest threat we have is from our own government, and the government of People's Party and Mr. Asif Ali Zardari and Rahman Malik. These people are more stooges to the Americans. They're more threatening to us than the CIA and the RAW perhaps. So we are officially banned in Pakistan national circuit. On Pakistan television, we are not allowed to appear. We are not invited to any diplomatic function. We are not invited to any diplomatic press briefings. And every government minister and people in power keep a very strong distance from us. It is very natural. We understand this and we accept this cost. They tried to choke our finances. They tried to buy us off, put a price tag on us. And now the only option left to them is to eliminate us physically. And we are waiting for the time when they make their first move. But this is the cost that we accept it. We accept the risks. The work we are doing is critical for national security. The work we are doing is absolutely vital for revival of this nation, for giving it hope, for destroying the work that the Americans and the CIA and the Mossad and the RAW is trying to do against Pakistan and Iran and Afghanistan and the greater Central Asian region. And we understand the importance of our work. And if at this moment, if we become afraid, if we compromise, and if we do not speak the truth, then Muslim nations in the region would suffer heavily. So we understand the role is critical, risks are equally high. But it's a risk that we take deliberately, and we are absolutely willing to pay the consequences. We face the consequences and pay the cost, whatever it may be. Pakistan have a very strong position right now. If we want, we can choke the American supplies. If we want, we can destroy the Americans as we destroy the Soviets. Pakistan have the will, we have the resources, we have the potential, we have the assets on ground available for us that we can make Afghanistan the graveyard for the US and the NATO forces. If the political will of the government right now that they are not doing it, the government is corrupt and weak. But with the Americans supporting Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan and the Indians working under the American umbrella, the time is not far, I feel, that Pakistanis will take a very decisive action. Pakistanis would form a national policy which either would declare neutrality in Afghanistan, which means we are neither supporting the Americans, neither supporting the Taliban, or if the Americans become too hostile to us, Pakistan can actually decide to engage Afghan Taliban on their side and do with the Americans what we did with the Soviets. Americans should fear that day when Pakistan decide to do that. You see, if you look at the Muslim world, there are different types of resistance movements going on within the Muslim world. And there are so many Muslim lands which are occupied. In fact, if you notice today, every occupied land is Muslim, whether it's Palestine, whether it's Chechnya, whether it's Iraq, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's Kashmir. These are Muslim occupied lands. And everywhere, Muslims are waging a war of resistance against the occupation forces. But nowhere you would find Muslims killing Muslims. Everywhere the fight is against the occupation forces and their allies. For example, in Palestine, Hamas is fighting against the Israeli troops, Israeli armed forces. Similarly, the Kashmiris do not deal with suicide bombings. Kashmiris are only attacking the Indian armed forces. Similarly, the Iraqi resistance is fighting against the American occupation force. And similarly, the Afghan Taliban are fighting against the American occupation also. If in this occupation they use a suicide bombing mechanism, which is basically a mode of delivery mechanism of the weapon system they carry, because they don't have long range weapons, so they carry the weapon onto themselves close to an enemy convoy and blast themselves off, this becomes a legitimate target under an occupation environment. But the difference between the Pakistani Taliban and rest of the resistance movements is that Pakistani Taliban believe the ideology of takfir, which means declaring the other Muslims as kafirs or non-Muslims as well on the basis of political differences. So Pakistani Taliban, they wage a war against civilians, they wage a war against Muslims, they wage a war against a Muslim state, while all other resistance groups fight against foreign occupation forces. This is a major difference between the two. Plus, all other Muslim resistance groups make a distinction between civilians and the military combatants, while the Pakistani Taliban have absolutely no distinction of this sort. What the war they are waging is ruthless, it's brutal, it's unscrupulous, it's without any morals and values, without any ideology and identity. It's basically a fascist, anarchic ideology, which is not jihad, which is not resistance, which is not fighting against the occupation forces. It is destroying your own self, your own country, your own people, men, women and children indiscriminately. And this is terrorism from all definitions of law, morality and international law. Cannot be accepted. this is a picture of vodka, alcohol and different types of whiskies which have been captured from the Taliban in Swat. The Swat militants of Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, they claim to be fighting for Islamic Sharia law, but they themselves consume alcohol and vodkas, and the weapons that they use are also of Indian origin. These are exclusive original pictures that we have received from the soldiers fighting on the front line. Show you some more of them actually. And this is an Indian weapon. It's a Vickers Indian machine gun. The Indian Army uses this as a standard weapon for them. They find from his jacket silencers for the weapons. So there is no Besada, Salai Besada. Yeah. And this kind of weapon systems is only available with special forces, is only available with intelligence agencies. But these men are using weapons with silencers. And who's giving them that? Where are they getting that from? They say why the media is not being taken into the battle areas. The simple reason is the media doesn't want to go. The fact is that Pakistani media is not trained and is not willing to go along with the special forces and with our airborne troops to go onto the front line and see the fighting themselves. Our media has not reached that level of professionalism.